My name is Ella Whitmore. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for most of my life, I believed family would always be my refuge. I thought the fortune my late husband Edward and I had built would bring comfort in our later years, not become a weapon aimed at me. On the evening of my birthday, my daughter Samantha and her husband Brian insisted I join them at the old family cabin in Montana. I wanted to believe it was an opportunity to mend our growing distance. Instead, it became the darkest night of my life. We gathered around the table, the hearth fire crackling louder than I remembered. Brian poured wine, his grin too sharp, his voice unnaturally calm. When I rose to stretch, he slipped outside. Then I heard it, the scrape of metal against wood, the unmistakable click of a bolt sliding into place. Through the window, his face appeared, bathed in the orange glow of something rising. He whispered 4 words I will never forget. Hope you like fire. Flames spread with terrifying speed, devouring curtains and climbing the walls. Smoke filled my lungs until every breath tore like knives. I pounded on the locked door until my fists bled. Samantha stood behind him, expression cold, body rigid. My own daughter, the girl I had cradled through sleepless nights, watched me without shedding a single tear. The fire consumed Edward's books, our photographs, the memories embedded in those walls. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't fate. It was murder masquerading as tragedy. But there was something they didn't know. Years ago, Edward had shown me a hidden escape in that cabin. Always know your way out, he had said. Amid the smoke and terror, I remembered. They expected me to be reduced to ash. Instead, I found my path through the darkness. I survived. I was not finished. And that's where my story truly begins. The invitation had come a week before my birthday. Samantha called late one evening, her voice unusually bright, almost rehearsed. She rattled off words quickly, saying she and Brian had restored the old Montana cabin and wanted me to celebrate my birthday there. It will be special, Mom, she promised. I hesitated. That cabin held decades of memory. Anniversaries with Edward teaching Samantha to fish, laughter filling the rooms. After Edward's death, I could not bear the thought of returning. The memories cut too deep. The silence was suffocating. Yet a part of me wanted to believe her. Perhaps she truly wanted to reconnect. Perhaps this was her attempt to bridge the years of distance between us. A mother's hope can blind her more than any smoke. So I said yes. The drive was long, twisting through pine forests and narrow roads. Brian drove in silence while Samantha filled the car with chatter about her new dress and a friend's trip to California. But not once did she ask how I was. I noticed, but forced myself not to dwell on it. When we arrived, unease settled over me. The cabin looked familiar, yet foreign. The porch gleamed with fresh paint, windows polished, steps reinforced. It felt staged, like a photograph of a home rather than a home itself. Inside, the table was set with fine china I hadn't seen in years. Candles flickered in the corners, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Samantha handed me a silver locket for my birthday. Lovely but empty. No photo, no engraving, just a hollow shell. I smiled politely, though my chest ached. I told myself it was an attempt at closeness. What I didn't know was that the invitation wasn't about reunion. It was bait. I had already walked into the trap. Dinner began under a silence heavier than the mountain air. The table held roasted chicken, wine, candlelight, a picture of celebration masking the danger beneath. Brian poured wine, swirling his glass before setting mine down with exaggerated care. I tasted bitterness instantly, metallic, strange. I forced a smile and set it aside. Samantha avoided my gaze, speaking in a flat, hollow voice about trivialities. Her words were lines from a play she no longer believed in. As the night wore on, heat built unnaturally. The fire in the hearth snapped louder, sparks flying higher. I stood to open a window, but the latch wouldn't budge. Brian excused himself and stepped outside. Moments later, the scrape of metal against wood reached my ears. When I looked at Samantha, I saw it in her face. She knew. Rigid, hands tightly folded, eyes wet but body still. Through the window, Brian's figure appeared against the orange glow. Calm, almost gentle, as though what he was about to do was ordinary. Leaning close, He whispered through the crack, "Hope you like fire." The bolt slid into place. The room became a cage. Flames surged faster than I could think. Curtains curled into ash. Heat rolled across the floorboards. Smoke clawed down my throat. I pounded the door with all my strength. It wouldn't give. I looked at Samantha one last time. My daughter, the child I had sung to sleep, sat frozen. Her silence screamed louder than Brian's threat. The trap had ignited, designed to end me. Flames closed in, smoke thickened, each breath like swallowing knives. My eyes burned, my skin stung. The cabin that had held our happiest summers now threatened to become my grave. Then Edward's voice came back, as clear as the day he spoke it. "Always know your way out." Years earlier, he had crafted a secret escape. At the time, I had laughed at his caution. Now, those words meant the difference between life and death. I stumbled toward the far wall, coughing, the fire roaring behind me. Books blackened, photographs curled into ash, but I pressed on. Behind a dusty shelf, I found the small wooden trap door Edward had built. Hands shaking, I opened it. Beneath, a narrow tunnel awaited, barely wide enough to crawl through. Smoke followed me, clinging to hair and clothes, but the earth cooled the burning air. I dragged myself on my elbows, lungs screaming for relief. Above, the cabin groaned as beams collapsed, each crash a reminder of how close the flames had come. My body ached, arms raw from splinters, but I moved forward inch by inch. Finally, after what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into the forest. I collapsed into the snow, chest heaving, skin coated in ash. The cold bit, but it was the sweetest pain I had ever felt. Behind me, the fire devoured the cabin until only an orange glow lit the sky. They believed I was gone, reduced to ashes. But I was alive, and survival gave me the chance to fight back. I stumbled through the trees as night faded into dawn. Every step burned, my legs shook, lungs raw from smoke. But I refused to stop. Ahead, beyond the highway, awaited the one person I knew I could trust, my oldest friend, Ruth. We had shared decades of life together. She was there when Samantha was born, when Edward and I built our company, when grief hollowed me after his death. If anyone could help me now, it was her. When I finally reached her door, my hand barely lifted to knock. Ruth opened it and froze, eyes wide at the sight of me, covered in soot, hair matted, eyes red from smoke. "Eleanor," she murmured, as though speaking my name might make me disappear. Without another word, she pulled me inside. Wrapped in a blanket, I poured out everything. The invitation, the dinner, Brian's hushed warning, Samantha's silence. Ruth's face shifted from shock to anger, her jaw tightening. "You are not imagining this," she said firmly. "They tried to kill you, and now we make sure they can't try again." Ruth picked up the phone and called someone she trusted, a private investigator named Max Carter. By evening, Max sat across from me at Ruth's kitchen table. Calm and meticulous, he asked me to recount every detail I could remember. "This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing," Max said after listening carefully. "It was planned. That means there will be paper trails, signatures, accounts. If we find them, we'll have proof." His confidence steadied me. For the first time since the fire, I felt a flicker of strength return. Ruth poured tea, placing her hand over mine. "You survived the fire, Eleanor. Now you've survived the truth. We faced this together." That night, lying in Ruth's guest room, I stared at the ceiling and whispered Edward's words, "Always know your way out." I had found mine, and now I was determined to uncover theirs. Max Carter wasted no time. The next evening, he drove me quietly to Portland, where Samantha and Brian lived. Ruth stayed behind, ready to contact Melissa Hale, a federal agent Max trusted, if we uncovered anything significant. We parked a block away, waiting until the house went dark. With practiced ease, Max guided us through the side door. My heart pounded with every step. Shadows seemed to whisper betrayal. The study was unnervingly neat, almost staged. Max's instincts told him to dig deeper. He opened drawers, peered behind picture frames, and eventually pulled out a folder tucked beneath the desk. Bold letters on the cover read, "Estate Transition." Inside were documents that made my stomach twist. property transfers bearing my forged signature, powers of attorney I never signed, even a draft death certificate with my name typed neatly at the top. My knees went weak. They had planned for my disappearance long before that night in the cabin. Then Max found a small USB drive taped to the back of the folder. Plugging it into his encrypted laptop, we watched the screen light up with audio files. Samantha's voice came first, shaky but practiced. My mother was lonely after Dad died. She often said the cabin was where she wanted to rest. Then Brian's calm, instructive voice followed. Slower. Put more sadness in it. They have to believe you. Hearing my own daughter rehearsing the script of my death shattered something inside me, but it also gave us proof. At the back of the folder was a list of names: Dr. Raymond Hull, Attorney Patricia Long, Financial Manager Paul Dennison. Beside each name, dollar amounts. Max leaned closer. This isn't just them. It's a network. Your daughter and son-in-law are only pieces. I closed the folder with trembling hands. For the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a witness, ready to speak. We knew we couldn't wait forever. Melissa Hale, the federal agent Ruth had contacted, helped set the stage. If Samantha and Brian thought I was gone, they'd move faster to claim the estate. But seeing me alive might unnerve them, loosen their defenses. So I returned to my Denver home, the house Edward and I had built together. Hidden microphones were placed in the living room, cameras tucked in corners where picture frames had hung. I sat in Edward's leather chair, the same seat where he had read the morning paper, and waited. When Samantha and Brian walked in, their faces went pale. Brian froze at the door, hand tightening on the knob. Samantha's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Looking for a ghost? I asked, my voice low and steady. Brian's composure cracked. This isn't possible, he spat. You're finished. I reached for the small recorder on the table and pressed play. Brian's voice filled the room, cold and unmistakable. Hope you like fire. The silence that followed was heavier than smoke. Samantha sank into a chair, tears streaking her cheeks. Brian clenched his fists, fury rising. Do you think anyone will believe you? He shouted. We had everything lined up. Papers, doctors, lawyers. You were already dead. His words were captured perfectly by the microphones. I slid the folder of forged documents across the table toward Samantha. Her eyes fell on the signatures, the evidence of betrayal, written by her own hand. I am not ashes, I told them. I am proof. For the first time since the fire, I saw fear in Brian's eyes, not of flames, but of the truth he could no longer control. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Melissa Hale entered, flanked by 2 federal agents. The air shifted instantly. Brian's defiance faltered. Samantha's sobs grew louder. Melissa's voice was calm but firm. Thank you, Mr. Warren. That was the confession we needed. Brian's eyes went wild. You don't understand. We weren't the first, and we won't be the last. Families line up for this. They wanted it. Melissa raised an eyebrow, unreadable. And now you've just confirmed there's more. Every word you speak here is evidence. The agents moved quickly. One collected the forged documents, sealing them in an evidence bag. Another pressed Brian against the wall, reading him his rights as he spat curses. Samantha didn't resist. She curled in on herself, trembling. I looked at her, voice softer than I expected. You chose silence when I begged for your help. Silence was your weapon, but it cannot protect you anymore. Melissa nodded slightly. The agents led Brian and Samantha out, their figures shrinking under the weight of justice. I placed my hand on Edward's chair. The leather felt warm, a reminder of every morning we had shared. I whispered into the stillness. The fire did not end me. It lit the path to truth. For the first time since the cabin, the smoke began to lift. The ashes hadn't buried me. They cleared the way for justice. The courthouse was colder than expected, marble halls echoing with footsteps and whispers. Reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing, but I kept my head high. This was bigger than me. It was about everyone their scheme had harmed. Inside, I sat quietly as charges were read. Attempted murder, conspiracy, forgery, financial exploitation of the elderly. Each word struck sharply. Samantha and Brian sat at the defense table. Brian's jaw was tight, eyes darting for sympathy. Samantha wore black, pale, shoulders slumped. For the first time, she looked less like my daughter and more like a stranger. The prosecution presented evidence, forged documents, the predated death certificate, the USB recordings of Samantha rehearsing grief under Brian's guidance, and finally, the living room recording. Hope you like fire. The jury listened in silence, hardening with each word. The defense tried to claim stress, confusion, even manipulation, but the evidence was irrefutable. Every page, every recording told the same story, deliberate. When it was my turn, I spoke little. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the rail, and met each juror's gaze. I am not ashes, I said quietly. I am proof. Those words echoed louder than any testimony. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood, guilty on all counts. The gavel fell, final and decisive. Samantha wept silently. Brian's shoulders sagged as rage drained into defeat. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I simply breathed, knowing truth had been heard, justice served. Months later, I returned to the mountains where the cabin had stood. Only blackened beams remained, but the place wouldn't remain in ruins. With Ruth, Melissa, and others who believed in second chances, we rebuilt it into Haven House. Haven House wasn't just for me. It became a refuge for women like me, widows, mothers, grandmothers betrayed by their own families. Here, they found warmth, voices, healing, meals, stories, laughter echoed where greed once reigned. I often sat on the porch, lavender swaying, mingling with pine. Children played in the yard, their laughter promising a kinder future. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Inside was a drawing from a young girl whose grandmother had stayed at Haven House. It depicted a little cabin, smoke rising gently, not flames. Two figures held hands. Above them, the words, "Thank you. Because of you, I still have her." Tears blurred the colors, not of sorrow, but of survival, of purpose. The fire meant to erase me had instead sparked a new beginning. I was not ashes. I was a witness, a survivor, a guardian. To you listening, remember, flames can destroy walls, but they cannot erase memory. Betrayal wounds, but truth will always speak. If my story touched you, share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and subscribe. Stories live when we pass them on. No voice, no matter how silenced, is ever truly gone.